Hello, I'm William S. Whorton. This is a continuation of Vietnam Insane Asylum series. Today, I'm going to be talking about leadership. I want to talk about one of the most interesting things that ever happened to me in Vietnam, and one of the most powerful things that even at age 83, I still carry with me. One of the most powerful images that I still carry with me at the age of 83 was an image in combat that was not combat, but it was an example of leadership. And the example of leadership came out of a confrontation between two senior officers, which I was a witness to. And this to me is one of the most fascinating things that I ever saw in my 21 months of combat in Vietnam. It was a confrontation between two senior officers over leadership that happened right on the demilitarized zone at the base of Con Thien, as a matter of fact. And it doesn't get any further in the north, nearer to North Vietnam than that during our war, because Con Thien was right on the demilitarized zone. So what I want to talk about today is I want to talk about what I saw that came out of a confrontation between two senior Army officers that gave me a real appreciation to what real leadership in combat really, really means. And I would call this is an example of the mission comes first. That's what I want to kind of talk about, is how the mission came first between a confrontation between two senior Army officers. Now, there's three heroes in this story, three heroes and one witness. I am the witness, and I will discuss the three heroes. Now, I'll talk about myself as witness first. I was a Marine Corps officer assigned to work for the United States Army as a senior battalion advisor fighting along the demilitarized zone. I really wanted this job very, very badly. There were very few officers assigned to the United States Army at that time. I was a Marine Corps officer, and I wanted to work with the United States Army desperately. I wanted to work in with their helicopter units. I wanted to work with their major units. I wanted to work in their organization. I wanted to see the Vietnam War from the Vietnamese side, so I wanted to live with Vietnamese soldiers. So this is why I became a senior battalion advisor to a Vietnamese Army infantry battalion. So that's my background. So here I am working for the United States Army. When I arrived in South Vietnam, I arrived in June 1st, 1968. Shortly after that, I went through a processing down in Saigon, and then I went up to do what they call the stages of the cross. I went to Da Nang, and then I went to Hue, and then I ended up in Dong Ha, where the regimental headquarters of 2nd Regiment was. So I was assigned to be senior advisor, 3rd Battalion, 2nd Regiment, 1st Armored Division. Now, my boss, I first met him around about June the 5th. And when I walked into Dong Ha, I walked into the headquarters there, it was a bunker. I was listening to one hell of a firefight going along on the DMZ. One of our battalions had been ambushed by a large North Vietnamese Army unit, and it was being fought. The battalion commander, the Vietnamese battalion commander, had been shot in the eye, and the battalion was being fought by the advisor. And I was listening to this Army captain advisor, and I was listening to one of the most artistic examples of fighting in combat that I have ever heard in my life. I was listening to this advisor, this captain, the way he was artistically conducting. I mean, it was absolutely incredible. I was listening to him call in artillery from many, many different places, then stopping the artillery so the Air Force could come in, do the bombing, do the napalm, and then the helicopters could come in and do their shooting and pick up some wounded. And then they would retreat and then back onto Navy gunfire, back onto the artillery again. And this was all being conducted by a master, an absolute master. And as I listened to that, I realized how much I really did not know about fighting along the DMZ. So I made it a point 2 days later to get in a helicopter, go back down to the 2nd Regiment headquarters and confront the captain. Now, I'm going to call this captain John Doe for very, very obvious reasons. I do not want to use the names of anybody whose family may be hurt by things I'm going to say later or something like that. So I'm going to use his name of John Doe. I regret having to do that because he was one of the bravest, most courageous fighting soldiers I ever saw in my life. As I met this captain, and he was very, very kind to me because I told him, I said, look, I really need to know what you know so that I can save lives from my battalion because I don't know the kinds of things that you know. And so he said, no problem, no problem. So he put a big bottle of scotch down in front of him, and then we just began to talk. And then over a period of several hours, the bottle of scotch got empty. And I realized that I was talking to an alcoholic. But that didn't bother me a bit because the information I got from Captain John Doe was just amazing. He was a great teacher, just a great, great teacher. He gave me all the information I needed to know. And at that time, and after that, I was able to go back to my battalion and able to understand a lot more about what I needed to do and what I needed to know and how I needed to perform my duties up there. So anyway, I owe Captain Doe a lot. Now, over a period of time, I served in combat, and I got better and better by following Doe's advice. I was able to do a lot of, I think, good things that helped, save the lives of my soldiers. So that was good. So one day, Colonel Parsons, and by this time, Colonel Parsons and I had a very close relationship for a lieutenant colonel in the Army and a captain in the Marine Corps, because I respected him so much. He was one of the bravest soldiers I ever saw in my life. On several operations we've been on, he'd come in with helicopters to get our wounded out. He'd broken the bubble. The bubble on several of the helicopters he's riding had been cracked because of gunfire, and because he'd come in so close on the trees and stuff. And I mean, gutsy beyond belief. So this is a person that I loved and respected very, very much. So anyway, one day, Colonel Parsons calls me. He called me up, and I'm up on Alpha 1, which is right about 3 kilometers south of the Ben Hai River into North Vietnam. So I'm about 3 kilometers from North Vietnam. And he called me up and said, Bill, I want you to get down here because tomorrow we're going to go up and see General Stillwell. Now, General Stillwell was the commander of 24th Corps. He was a 3-star Army general, 3 stars. That means that he commanded all U.S. Army troops in I Corps. I don't know how many divisions he was in charge of, but it was probably around about 3 or 4. So anyway, we had to go up and meet him. Now, I had met General Stillwell a number of times already. Now, I'm going to have to tell my friends out there, I did not personally like or respect General Stillwell as a person. Now, as a 3-star general, I saluted, yes, sir, 3 bags full. I'm a Marine. I obey all orders and all that kind of thing. But here was a problem. The first time I met General Stillwell in the field, he dropped down, and I went up to pay my respects, and he said, "Well, how's your battalion, Captain?" So I did just a little test, because I didn't know the general. I didn't know anything about him, so I wanted to know how much truth could I tell him. How could we communicate with each other? Could we be open in our communications, or are we going to go through this political, correct party line crap, kind of thing? The Vietnamese are winning the war and all this kind of stuff, which is just total bullshit. So I made just a little tiny negative remark about my battalion, and immediately I got back from and I'm a captain, he's a 3-star general. I got back, "Well, Captain, what's wrong with your attitude? What kind of attitude have you got? It seems to me your attitude's very poor, and said, no, sir, you just completely missed." And then I went into one of these things like, "Gosh, I don't know what I'm going to do, because my Vietnamese all want to go north and kill Ho Chi Minh, and I don't know how I'm going to control them." And so I did my little dance, my little political dance for the general. And because I realized that I was talking to a man that could destroy my career. Because once you're relieved in combat, your career's over. Now, a number of friends of mine have been relieved as platoon commanders. I've already done a tour as a platoon commander in Vietnam. Several of my buddies have been from basic school, been removed. And once you're removed in combat, once you're taken off the field, that's it. Your career's over. And I did not want that happening to me. And this is a 3-star general, and he obviously does not particularly care for Marines either. Now, one of the interesting things is that General Stillwell did like my team sergeant. Now, in a number of videos, I've talked about my team sergeant and how he's Sergeant First Class Thomas Hippensteel. And I've talked in a number of videos already about how Tom Hippensteel, a man I call Hip, and I became brothers in combat. So I've already talked about that. But General Stillwell liked Hip. They were old Army. Hip was old Army all the way, Army, airborne, all that kind of stuff. And so General Stillwell and Hippensteel and Hip would walk off together and just leave, and I would just run off, because I would do my little, after that, I would do my little report, and do my little, report, and then I would just run off, and then Hip would run up to General Stillwell, and they would talk about the Army or whatever kind of thing. But I just want our friends out there to understand that I do want to say this. It was very clear the first time I met General Stillwell. He's a very tall man. When I talked to him, I'm 6'1", I'm 6'1", and I had to look up to talk to him. I don't know how tall he was, but he was a real presence. I can tell you that right now. Not just because he was a 3-star general, but this guy was smart, and he was really, really tough. And there was absolutely no doubt in my mind that if I had said the wrong word or just one more word, I'd have been told to get on that helicopter and my career would be over. There was absolutely no doubt in my mind that would happen. He was a real presence. I mean, he was tough, very, very, very intelligent, obviously, but he was totally committed to the party line. The Vietnamese are winning the war. That was the party line, and by God, everybody under him was going to go that way. Okay, I understood that. It's not a problem. Now, let me talk, since I talked about General Stillwell a little bit, let me talk a little bit more about Colonel Parsons. Colonel Parsons and I had developed a very, very close relationship, but he didn't understand Marines very well. I mean, for example, I used to use a lot of profanity as an officer, and Colonel Parsons was an officer and a gentleman. I can tell my friends out there, Colonel Parsons was not one of these guys that worship the Dirty Dozen. Everybody remembers the Hollywood movie, The Dirty Dozen, and about how all these criminals and they're going to come together and become great soldiers and all this other kind of stuff. Colonel Parsons didn't belong to that school at all. He was an officer and a gentleman. did not use profanity, didn't drink, and obviously did not play around with any of the women around, any of that kind of stuff either. He obviously loved his wife, very much of a family man. However, I'll say this about Colonel Parsons. Colonel Parsons was tough. I watched him relieve a number of officers and sergeants from our duty in our regiment that were attached to us. I watched him get rid of people. Now, he didn't do this in a way that would ruin their careers. He did this in a way that got them out of our unit because they were unfit to serve in our kind of combat. Our kind of combat was a very, very, very tough kind of combat because we were along the DMZ, artillery all the time. We had to fight a lot. It was a brutal business. It was a brutal life. And not everybody's fit for that. And Colonel Parsons, when he saw somebody that was not fit for it, he got him out. Now, I talked to several officers later on that were kicked out of our unit but got jobs down in division staff and stuff like that. And they said that the way he did it was great for them because there was nothing on their record, nothing at all. He left no trace that there was anything wrong with the officer. So he was kind that way, but he was tough as hell as far as professional because you had to be the best to serve with him. If you weren't the best, I can say this, if you weren't the best, you were gone. I mean, that's just the way he was. So anyway, with that kind of background, we're back to Colonel Parsons called me on Alpha 1 and he said, Bill, get down here. Tomorrow morning, we're going up to Cantonese and General Stillwell wants to see us because we got a big operation coming up and there's going to be 3 of our battalions are going to be involved. I said, okay, sir. So I'll get on a black hat. I'll get down in the evening before, and then we'll just shoot up there for, in the morning, then the following morning. Because I knew that the other battalion was going to have Captain Doe in it, I said, sir, have you talked to Captain Doe, about tomorrow morning? Because here's another thing about Captain Doe. Over the following, after my study lesson with him, and I met him a couple other times, I learned from my Vietnamese friends, first of all, Captain Doe was very popular in our regiment. Vietnamese loved him. His own Vietnamese loved him. And every night he would get, I was told by the Vietnamese, he would get dead drunk, go out of his bunker, stagger out in the rice paddy someplace, fall down dead drunk. The Vietnamese would be following him in a stretcher. They would roll him on a stretcher and then take him back to his bunk and then tuck him in, his bunk. That's what happened every night. So I cautioned, Colonel Parsons. I said, you did tell Captain Doe about, General Stillwell arriving tomorrow, right? And Colonel Parsons says, yeah, I did. So we show up at Cantonese the next day. Doe's not there. So there I am, and I'm with a friend of mine, another Army captain. We're because he's going to be on the operation too. And then General Stillwell comes up with his aides and people like that. And General Stillwell says, he's counting 1, 2. Where's the other advisor? And Colonel Parsons said, well, he's not here right now. He's someplace else. And General Stillwell says, I want that advisor here now. Colonel Parsons goes down and gets Doe. Well, Doe comes up. Doe's still drunk. He's still drunk and he can't hardly stand, but he's wearing a red beret. And on the red beret, all of his medals, the big medals, are hanging down from his red beret. And he has a lot of medals. They're hanging kind of over his face. All he's wearing is he's wearing a dirty undershirt and dirty underwear. no trousers, no shirt. And he's wearing a .45 pistol, and the pistol is hanging down on his knees. And he's got boots on, but the boots are completely unlaced. And of course, his legs are all bare because he doesn't have any trousers on. So the boots are all unlaced. And then he stands in front of General Stillwell looking like that. And then he tries to salute. He puts his hand up like that, like he's trying to salute. He tried to mutter, good morning, sir, or something like that. And then General Stillwell just looked at that, and now I've got to be careful. I've got to be careful kind of what I say, because I don't want to use words like screaming or yelling or profanity or anything like that, because that's not General Stillwell, and I want to be fair to him. So I'm going to call what General Stillwell did, I'm going to call that a thundering berating. How's that? Thundering berating. Can everybody understand thundering berating? That's not screaming or yelling or screeching or anything like that. A thundering berating is a thunderous anger from a very, very senior officer about, what's going on. So General Stillwell starts doing that. And then Colonel Parsons moves directly in between General Stillwell and Captain Doe, moves directly between them, and he stops Stillwell dead in his tracks. And then Colonel Parsons starts talking to General Stillwell, and he starts, I can't, it's been 56 years now. I can't remember the exact words that Colonel Parsons says. I'd be lying in my teeth if I said I could. But it went something like, he described the kind of courage and the kind of guts and the kind of knowledge and the kind of ability that it takes to fight on the DMZ and to do this. And he goes on and on. These are the qualities, General, I require. These are the qualities I require. And Captain Doe, of all my advisors, is the best. He's the best of all of my advisors. And of course, I agreed with that. I mean, he was the best. And these are the qualities that I require. And he has those qualities. He fights. He's got guts and he fights. And then he looked at General Stillwell. And I'll remember this phrase. This phrase is a direct quote. Who do you think is going to fight on this on the DMZ? And then he pointed at General Stillwell's aide. Him? You think he's going to fight on this on the DMZ? And of course, General Stillwell's aide was like all aides. He was a beautiful young man with absolutely starch-pressed, uniforms and spit-shine boots. I mean, I need soldiers. And I remember Colonel Parsons, I need soldiers. Soldiers have to fight on the DMZ. I need soldiers. I need real soldiers. General Stillwell, he looked at, then Colonel Parsons stopped, and General Stillwell, he went kind of like, but didn't say anything. He looked at me, and he looked at my buddy, and then he motioned to Colonel Parsons to walk off with him. And so Colonel Parsons told me and my friend, get Doe down to his bunk again, okay? And then he walked off with General Stillwell, and I was just kind of lost in amazement, because I had just seen a lieutenant colonel stand in front of a lieutenant general and basically shout him down. And I can tell you that General Stillwell was not the kind of man that you did that to. You just didn't do that to him. Now, one of the things that I'm going to point out about General Stillwell also, General Stillwell has been written about in a number of historical books because he's very prominent. He had a very, very distinguished career, very distinguished career, especially with the Central Intelligence Agency. He was involved with a lot of really, really very high level things. But in the book, I'm going to show you the book, The Best and the Brightest. He doesn't come off very well. He does not come off well at all. It's the political things. After that event, my partner and I, my buddy and I, after we put Doe away, came up, and I still saw, Colonel Parsons and General Stillwell talking, kind of animated in a very kind of a, but then stopped, and Colonel Parsons came up, big smile on his face. I just asked Colonel Parsons, I said, "Are you still my boss?" And he said, a big smile on his face, he said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, what about Doe?" "Doe will remain." And for the first time, and I want this to sink in to my friends out there, for the first time, I had real respect for General Stillwell. Because somewhere in General Stillwell, there was a soldier that could look at a guy like Doe and look at a guy like Colonel Parsons and see guts, real soldierly guts and honor and manliness and soldierly qualities, and he's going to let him stay there. I don't know what happened. I mean, I really don't know what happened. And Colonel Parsons, as close as we were, he never talked about it after that. He never said a word to me, and I never asked, because if he wanted me to know, he'd have told me. But for the first time, I respected General Stillwell as a soldier, and I do to this day, because somewhere for him the mission came first, and he understood that as a soldier, what's the important thing is the mission. It's not your ego. It's not your lust for power. It's not your being a control freak or anything else. It's mission. Mission comes first, and for some reason, Stillwell got that message from Parsons. I need this guy. This guy is important for me because he's going to save lives, he's going to kill enemy, and he's going to save lives. And that's the mission. The mission comes first. And somehow, somewhere, General Stillwell overcame his ego and he let it go. That to me remains a real mystery. I don't know. I don't know what happened. So now later on, shortly after this event, I have to say this. Colonel Parsons was killed shortly after this event. He took one chance too many. We were out in Ashow Valley. There were 3 of us battalions out there. We'd been out 8 days without food and no batteries. Colonel Parsons came off of his leave from Hawaii. His wife probably received the death notification as soon as before even she got home from Hawaii. I don't know what happened to Doe. I came to Vietnam in June 1968. I left in May 1969. Doe was still there. Doe belonged in war. That's where he lived. That's where he belonged. I have a feeling that it did not end well, because people like Doe do not survive well in peacetime army, in a peacetime situation. They're wonderful in war, but peacetime cannot adapt. I just want to close this down by saying that this happened to be one of the most amazing incidences of my life, because I saw a tremendous confrontation between 2 senior officers, and out of it, I really got an understanding of how mission comes first. Not your ego, not anything else. It's the mission. That's the important thing. Thank you, and goodbye for now.
Please do not miss Bill's many riveting stories about his 2 combat tours in Vietnam, told through his Insane Asylum series videos, and if you want to discover the incredible story about one of the most consequential military aviation events of the 20th century, please do not miss my latest video, The Day U.S. Navy Admirals Wept. As always, Bill and I appreciate you watching.